To utilize this command with an alarm sequence, one needs to create a macro that will display particular cameras based on different alarm situations. Once the different macros are created, each displaying different cameras for different alarms, all that is left is to trigger for those macros at the correct time. The device where the alarm occurs will be the trigger. The macro that runs because of the alarm will use the remote macro command and select the viewing machine's respective macro. This effectively will cause the correct cameras to be displayed once the alarm occurs. Basically what that means is, by utilizing the macro power of ViconNet, I can have on my review station, on my workstation, different macros where each macro will be separate for each different alarm situation that can occur. For example, in our particular case, I have the camera 3 on the collective force as a video motion alarm, and if I want to display that camera when that alarm goes off, then what I need to do is create a macro on my machine to display that camera. And if I wanted to display camera 7 when camera 7's alarm goes off, then I need to create a macro on my machine to display camera 7. And if I want to go into the 910 IP camera, and when that camera has a video motion detection, I want to display that camera, then I simply add another macro to my machine that will display that camera. And then via the remote macro function, I'll be able to specifically display the camera where the alarm occurred. As an example, if I take a camera, whether it's IP camera 1 or an analog camera that has a video motion detection alarm configured, when motion occurs in the region of interest, workstation 1 needs to display an alarm notification and display that particular camera. To get this to work properly, I have to configure both the camera and the workstation accordingly. The way to start is to actually go into the workstation and set it up. We want to make sure that our external alarm is turned on. We already did that, so I'm going to skip that part. But I also want to be able to create a macro to display the camera that I want to display. So I'm going to go and create a particular macro by clicking on the Add Macro button. And I'm going to give it a name that makes sense to me. So I'm going to call it the collector force camera number 3 video motion detection. Because what I want to do is I want to be able to display camera number 3 when video motion detection occurs for that camera. I'm going to click on the display command, and from my list I'm going to go and select camera number 3, and I'll select it for, in our case, 10 seconds so that it does not lock up our screen so long. But of course you can enter any duration that you want. You can enter whatever quality that you want as well. And I'm going to click on apply, and there's my command. So basically I'm going to be able to display that camera when this macro is triggered. If I wanted to display more cameras for this particular alarm, then I can add more cameras to that display command. This is a macro, so all rules that apply to a macro still apply. It doesn't matter that I'm going to be using this macro in one particular way. I can still do whatever I want with the macro. I'm going to save this, and there's my KF camera 3 VMD macro. I'm going to quickly delete some of these other ones just so that it's easier to keep track of the macro that I'm writing. So just bear with me 1 second. And there's the one macro I really want. Here an alarm came on, but we haven't triggered the macro yet, so we don't have any actual effects. Now what I'm going to do, the workstation is configured. We know that external alarm is on. We now have a macro to perform what we want it to do. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to the collective force. I'm going to go back to the particular camera that I'm setting up. So in this particular case, we were in alarms, and we were dealing with the activity detection of camera number 3. I'm going to edit it. Here's my region of interest, my activity time, and here's the macro that it's supposed to trigger when it runs. And we know this works because I receive alarms on my machine when this alarm is activated. I'm going to go to the macro editor, and I'm going to edit this macro. Now I could have simply gone to the macro editor to begin with. I didn't have to go to the alarm screen. I'm just making sure you see the full path of how the alarm and the macro are linked. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add another command, and I'm going to add it after the send alarm command, and we're going to do the remote macro command. And what I'm going to do is once I select remote macro, I'm going to select the workstation from the list at the bottom left. All of workstation 1's macros will be listed, and I'm going to select the collective force camera 3 VMD macro. And when I click on apply, it's added to my macro. And what this macro will do is it'll first send the alarm when the alarm is activated, and then it's going to tell my machine to run this macro based on the alarms that just occurred. I'm going to click on save, and I'm going to close, and it'll take me back to the alarm withered. And it's still the same macro that's linked, and I'm going to click on finish. And now what's going to happen when the alarm is activated, and let me see if I can trigger that off. Here the alarm went off, and as you can see, the screen changed to showing me only that camera in a large display. And that's because of the macro that is running. We have the macro listed to display for 10 seconds. After 10 seconds, it's going to stop. And once motion was activated in the region of interest on that particular camera for that video motion detection alarm, it was activated and it triggered that macro that we created on the collective force, which basically sent the alarm notification to my workstation, and then it told my workstation to go ahead and run a remote macro. And that's what my station did. Now if I were to go to the IP camera 910, for example, and I go into its setup, and I go into its alarm, and I add a detector, and I make it, let's say, camera input 1 video motion detection, and I follow through the steps we've already done, then I can have that trigger a macro on the workstation as well. What would be needed to be done first is to create the macro on the workstation for all of the different types of alarm reactions I want for that workstation. And then when I do that, if the 910 camera had the alarm, it would then pop up on my screen as well, and the particular macro that it's trying to run would run on my screen.